He just wanted to teach his son the value of a day's work, even if the work was picking up other people's trash, and the day's pay barely covered a gallon of milk. But when the mysterious woman on the park bench started watching them, he had no idea she was a reclusive billionaire who was about to change his entire world. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long golden stripes across the grass of Westwood Park. It was the kind of light that made everything look a little bit better than it was. A soft filter over the cracked pavement and the faded paint of the playground equipment. Liam Morgan moved with a steady, practiced rhythm, his gloved hand reaching for a discarded coffee cup, a crumpled newspaper, a plastic bottle half filled with murky water. Beside him, his 7-year-old son, Noah, mirrored his movements with a miniature trash grabber, his small face a mask of serious concentration. This was their ritual, 3 days a week, rain or shine. It wasn't a job. Not really. Not in the way Liam used to understand the word. It was a city stipend, a small check at the end of the month for residents willing to help keep the public spaces clean. It was grocery money. It was the difference between making rent and praying for a miracle. He straightened up, pressing a hand to the small of his back, the familiar ache, a dull reminder of how far he'd fallen. A year ago, he'd been an architect, sketching blueprints in a glass-walled office that overlooked the city. A year ago, his wife was still alive. A year ago, the world made sense. Now, his world was this park, this little boy, and the quiet dignity of cleaning up what others left behind. "Got one, Dad," Noah said, holding up a greasy fast food bag like a trophy. Liam smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through his chest, chasing away the chill for a moment. "Good job, buddy. Put it in the sack." For Noah, this was a game, a treasure hunt. For Hyam, it was a lesson. A lesson in responsibility, in humility, in the quiet honor of doing a job no one else wanted. He didn't want his son to ever feel shame, not for the state of their apartment, not for the worn-out soles of his shoes, and certainly not for this. He wanted Noah to see the value in their effort, the simple pride in leaving a place better than they found it. As he tied off one of the heavy plastic bags, his gaze drifted to the bench near the old oak tree. She was there again. She'd been there every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 weeks. A woman who sat so still she almost blended into the scenery. She wore simple, elegant clothes, a long charcoal coat, dark jeans, boots that looked soft and expensive, even from a distance. She never talked on the phone, never scrolled through a screen. She just watched. Not him, not directly. She watched the park, the families, the dogs chasing squirrels, the leaves skittering across the pavement. But sometimes, Hyam felt her gaze linger on him, and Noah, a quiet, unreadable curiosity that made the hair on his arms stand up. He didn't know who she was, but he knew one thing for certain: she didn't belong here. Not in this forgotten park on the edge of town. People like her, with her posture and her stillness, they belonged in high-rise apartments with doormen, not on a splintered park bench, watching a man pick up trash. He shouldered the bag, the plastic crinkling loudly in the quiet air. "Come on, Noah," he said, his voice a little too rough. "Let's get this last section done, before it gets dark." He turned away from the bench, from the woman, from the unsettling feeling that he was being seen in a way he hadn't been in a very long time. He didn't want to be seen. He just wanted to survive. The woman on the bench, Ilara Vance, drew her coat tighter, though it wasn't the autumn air that chilled her. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years, a strange, disquieting mix of envy and something that felt dangerously close to hope. She watched the man and his son, a small, self-contained universe of two, moving with a shared purpose that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The man, with his tired shoulders and gentle hands, exuded a kind of quiet strength she hadn't encountered in her own world. Her world was boardrooms and benefit galas, a landscape of polished surfaces and transactional relationships. People didn't do things for kindness. They did them for leverage, for optics, for a return on investment. This man, he was picking up trash for what she could only assume was a pittance, yet he did it with a focus and grace that was more compelling than any CEO's keynote speech. And the boy, his son, he wasn't just helping, he was learning something fundamental that Alara herself had never been taught. He was learning that his father's love was a verb, an action, a steady presence in a world of discarded things. Alara had built parks like this one all over the country. The Vance Foundation, her silent legacy, had funded green spaces in forgotten neighborhoods, believing that a place to breathe could change a community's trajectory. She had read the reports, seen the data, approved the budgets, but she had never sat in one. Not like this. Not anonymously. She had come to Westwood Park to see if her money was doing any good, to see if the carefully planned layouts and strategically placed benches actually meant anything to the people who used them. She hadn't expected to find this man and this boy. They were here every time she came, a fixed point in the shifting afternoon light. She knew she should leave them alone. She knew that her presence, if her identity were ever known, would shatter the fragile peace of their world. She was a complication, a headline waiting to happen. But she couldn't bring herself to leave. She was drawn to their authenticity, to the unvarnished reality of their lives. They were a living, breathing testament to something she'd only ever read about in proposals: resilience, dignity, love. Noah stopped suddenly, his little trash grabber pointing toward the ground near Alara's bench. He bent down, his face a knot of concentration, and picked up a small, smooth gray stone. He turned it over and over in his palm, his eyes wide with discovery. He paused, watching him. "What'd you find, buddy?" Noah didn't answer his dad. Instead, he took a tentative step toward the bench, then another, until he stood just a few feet from Alara, holding out the stone. "Look," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "It has stripes, like a tiny tiger." Alara looked from the stone to the boy's earnest face, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime she smiled, a real smile. One that reached her eyes and thawed something frozen deep inside her. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. And in that moment, the distance between her world and his collapsed into the space of a single, perfect stone. Liam watched the interaction with a knot tightening in his stomach. He saw the way the woman's face transformed when she smiled at Noah, the way the carefully constructed mask of detached observation crumbled, revealing something softer, something vulnerable underneath. He should have walked over, should have pulled Noah back with a polite apology and a firm hand. It was what he always did. He kept his son close, shielded from a world that had already taken too much. But he found himself frozen, watching as Noah, emboldened by her smile, took another step closer. "You can hold it if you want," Noah offered, his voice still a reverent whisper. "But you have to give it back. It's a good luck rock." Alara's smile deepened. She held out a hand, her fingers long and pale, her nails impeccably clean but unpainted. A stark contrast to his own, which were permanently stained with grease and dirt, the calluses thick from years of work that didn't involve sitting on park benches. She took the rock with a gentleness that surprised Ham, cradling it in her palm as if it were a fragile egg. "Thank you," she said, her gaze lifting to meet Ham's over Noah's head. "He's got a good eye for treasure." Ham managed a tight nod, his throat suddenly dry. He finally forced his legs to move, walking over to stand beside his son. "Noah, don't bother the lady." "He's not bothering me," Alara said quickly, her voice smooth as silk. She handed the rock back to Noah, her fingers brushing his. "I'm Alara." The name hung in the air, simple and unadorned, yet it felt like it carried weight. "Ham," he said, his own name sounding rough and plain in comparison. "And this is Noah." "Noah?" having successfully completed his mission, beamed and stuffed the rock into his pocket, patting it for good measure. "We're cleaning the park," he announced proudly. "My dad says it's our job to be helpers." Ilara's eyes flicked to Ham, and he saw something in them he couldn't quite decipher, not pity, but something closer to respect. "Your dad is a very wise man." He felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. He wasn't used to compliments, especially not from women who looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. He was used to averted gazes, to the polite but firm tone of landlords asking for rent, to the sympathetic but ultimately helpless shrugs of potential employers. "We should get going," he said, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder. "It's getting late. It was nice to meet you, Liam." "Noah," Ilara said, her voice returning to its quiet composure. But the smile lingered in her eyes. As they walked away, Ham could feel her gaze on his back. It wasn't the detached observation of before. It was something else now. Something focused. Something that felt like the beginning of a story he wasn't sure he was ready to be in. That night, as Noah slept soundly in his bed, the tiger-striped rock clutched in his hand, Liam sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the chipped linoleum floor. He couldn't shake the image of her. Ilara. The way her name had sounded in. The quiet of the park. The way her smile had seemed to light her up from the inside. He told himself it was nothing. A chance encounter. A moment of shared humanity. But the realist in him, the part that had been sharpened by loss and hardship, knew better. People like her didn't just happen. They were events. And he had a feeling this event was far from over. He had no idea how right he was. The next time they were at the park, she was there. And the time after that, she never approached them first. But she was no longer a silent observer. She was a presence, a quiet anchor on the edge of their routine. The conversations started small. A comment about the weather. A question about the type of bird perched on a nearby branch. Noah, with his complete lack of filter, was the bridge. He'd run up to her to report his trash-finding progress, or to ask her opinion on whether squirrels liked peanut butter. Ilara would listen with an attentiveness that Hyam found both unnerving and captivating. She never spoke down to Noah, never used the syrupy sweet tone that many adults adopted with children. She spoke to him like he was a person with valid, interesting thoughts. One brisk afternoon, as a cold wind whipped through the park, she appeared at the edge of the playground holding 2 steaming paper cups. She walked over to where Liam was trying to untangle a kite string from a low-hanging branch. "I thought you two might be cold," she said, holding out the cups. "It's hot chocolate," Hem hesitated, his pride warring with the simple, undeniable kindness of the gesture. Accepting help felt like an admission of need, and he had spent the last year teaching himself not to need anything from anyone. But then he looked at Noah, whose eyes had lit up like he'd just been offered a winning lottery ticket. "Thank you," Hem said, his voice gruff as he took one of the cups. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt of warmth shot up his arm that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate. They sat on the bench together, the 3 of them, sipping in near silence. The chocolate was rich and dark, not the powdery mix Liam usually bought. It tasted expensive. "You come here a lot," Ham stated, turning it into a question. Ilara nodded, staring out at the pond. "I like the quiet. It helps me think." "What do you think about?" Noah asked, peering at her over the rim of his cup. She smiled. "Oh, all sorts of things. How to make cities better. How to build spaces that make people feel like they belong." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a big job." "It is," she agreed. "I work in urban planning." It was a vague answer, but it fit. She had the thoughtful, observant air of someone who saw the world in systems and structures. She saw the broken bench, the overflowing trash can, the lack of proper lighting near the restrooms. Liam had seen her making notes in a small, leather-bound notebook with a pen that looked like it cost more than his monthly grocery bill. He found himself talking more than he had to a stranger in years. He told her about his work as an architect, about the satisfaction of seeing a blueprint become a building, a home. He didn't tell her about losing his job after his wife's medical bills piled up. He didn't tell her about the foreclosure. He kept the raw, broken parts of his story to himself. But he shared the rest, and she listened, really listened. Her gaze was steady, her questions insightful. She wasn't filling time. She was connecting, and that scared him more than anything. Because, as the days turned into weeks, Liam realized he was starting to look for her when he arrived at the park. He was starting to anticipate their quiet conversations. He was starting to feel something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the world fell apart, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like a beginning. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that beginnings were just promises of an eventual end. Ilara found herself rearranging her schedule, manufacturing reasons to be in that part of the city on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and sometimes even Saturdays. Her work, the real work of managing the Vance Foundation, could be done from anywhere. Her team was used to her reclusive nature, her preference for emails over meetings. But this was different. This wasn't work. This was research, she told herself. Field research. It was important to understand the human impact of her philanthropy. But it was a lie, and she knew it. She wasn't studying a community, she was studying a man. To Liam. He was a paradox she couldn't solve. He was broken, but whole, proud, but humble. He spoke about architecture with a passion that was still palpable, even though it was clear he was no longer practicing. He spoke about his son with a fierce, gentle love that was the bedrock of his entire existence. He was the most grounded person she had ever met, and it was a quality she found herself craving, like a starving person craves bread. She learned about him in small pieces. He liked his coffee black. He could identify any tree in the park by its bark. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that only appeared when he let his guard down. He was teaching Noah how to read using old comic books he'd saved from his childhood. He was, in every sense of the word, a good man. And that goodness was a beacon in the cynical darkness of her own life. Her life was a carefully curated illusion. Her apartment was a sterile, minimalist space designed by an interior decorator she'd never met. Her friends were business associates. Her romantic history was a series of disastrous encounters with men who were either intimidated by her wealth or saw it as a prize to be won. She had learned to build walls, high and impenetrable, to protect herself. But Liam wasn't trying to scale her walls. He didn't even seem to notice they were there. He looked at her and saw a woman. Just a woman, sitting on a park bench. He didn't know the weight of her last name. He didn't know that the park they were sitting in was a direct result of a check she had signed, and that ignorance was the most precious gift she had ever received. One afternoon, she found the courage to ask him a more personal question. "What happened to Noah's mom?" she asked softly. Her gaze fixed on the ducks gliding across the pond. Liam was silent for a long moment. She thought perhaps she had overstepped, pushed too far into the private territory he guarded so fiercely. But then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Cancer," he said. "It was fast. 1 minute she was fine, the next she was gone." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The single word held a universe of pain. Ilara felt a sharp, unexpected ache in her own chest. Not pity, but empathy. She knew what it was like to have the world pulled out from under you. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "Me too." He stood up then, needing to move, to put a physical distance between himself and the memory. "We should finish up." As he walked away, Ilara clutched her leather notebook, her knuckles white. She had come to the park, seeking authenticity, and she had found it. But she was living a lie. Every smile, every conversation, was built on a foundation of omission, and she knew, with a cold dread, that foundations built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned, were destined to crumble. Liam started noticing the small things, the inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. Ilara said she worked in urban planning, but she never mentioned a company or a boss. She drove a different car every week, always a late-model sedan, clean and unassuming, but never the same one twice. They were rentals, she'd explained once. Her company covered them. It was a plausible explanation, but it felt thin. Then there was the way she talked about money. She never flaunted it, but there was an unconscious ease in her language. When Noah's worn-out sneaker finally split open at the toe, Liam had been quietly agonizing over how to afford a new pair before the next paycheck. Ilara, seeing the boy's foot poking through, had casually remarked, "Oh, we should just pop over to that shoe store on Main Street and grab him a new pair." The "we" and the "just grab" were so effortless, so devoid of the silent, frantic calculations that governed Liam's every purchase. He'd politely declined, of course, mumbling something about having a pair at home. Her offer had been kind, but it had also been a spotlight on the chasm between their worlds. The park, their neutral ground, was beginning to feel less neutral. It felt like her territory, a space she moved through with an inherent confidence he lacked. He was a visitor in his own city, in his own life, and she was, what? A patron? A benefactor? The thought made him deeply uncomfortable. His pride was one of the few things he had left, a stubborn, battered shield against the world's pity. He didn't want to be a project. He didn't want to be saved. One gray, overcast day, Liam arrived at the park to find it buzzing with an unusual energy. City workers were installing a new set of swings, the metal frames gleaming and new. A small crowd of parents and children had gathered to watch. In the center of it all, talking to a man in a suit holding a clipboard, was Ilara. She wasn't the quiet, contemplative woman from the bench. She was in command. Her posture was different, more authoritative. Her gestures were precise as she pointed to a spot on the ground, her voice too low for Liam to hear, but her expression clear and decisive. The man in the suit nodded eagerly, scribbling notes. Liam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't an urban planner. This was someone else. This was the person who signed the checks. Noah ran. Ahead, excited by the new equipment. "Look, Dad! New swings!" Him hung back, his feet feeling heavy as lead. Ilara looked up then, her eyes scanning the crowd and landing on him. For a split second, he saw a flash of something in her face, panic, maybe, or regret. She quickly composed herself, gave the man a final nod, and started walking toward Liam. "Ham," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Isn't this wonderful? They're finally upgrading the playground." He didn't smile back. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and the pieces began to click into place. The vague job title, the rental cars, the effortless way she talked about improving the city, the park itself. "You did this, didn't you?" he asked, his voice flat. "All of it. The swings, the new benches, the path they repaved last month." Ilara's smile faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence was her confession. "Who are you, Ilara?" he asked, the question hanging between them, heavy and sharp. She looked down, her gaze falling to the cracked pavement at her feet. "It's complicated. Try me," he said, his voice laced with a bitterness he hadn't intended, but it was too late. The easy trust they had built, the fragile connection forged over hot chocolate and shared silences, had just been fractured, and Liam had a terrible feeling that the crack went all the way through. Ilara's composure, the one she had so carefully maintained, finally broke. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cheerful clang of metal on metal from the workers. I didn't know how. How about the truth?" Liam's voice was low, but it cut through the air like a blade. The truth is usually a good place to start. He felt a raw, searing disappointment that was sharper than anger. He had let her in. He had let his son grow attached to her. He had allowed himself to hope, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who saw him for who he was, not what he lacked. And all along, she had been hiding, playing a part. "It's not what you think," she said, taking a step closer. He instinctively took a step back, creating a physical barrier to match the emotional one that had just slammed into place. "Isn't it?" he challenged. "Let me guess. You're some wealthy philanthropist, and this park is one of your pet projects. You come here to what? Check on your investment? See if the poors are enjoying the breadcrumbs you've tossed them?" The words were cruel, and he knew it the moment they left his mouth. He saw the hurt flash in her eyes, a deep, genuine pain that made him feel like a heel, but he couldn't take them back. They were born of his own humiliation, his own fear of being seen as a charity case. Noah, sensing the shift in tone, ran back and clutched his father's leg, his small face clouded with confusion. Ilara looked at the boy, and her expression softened with regret. "It was never about that, Liam. It was about you. And Noah. I saw you, and I wanted to be near that. I wanted to feel something real for a change." "Real?" Liam let out a short, humorless laugh. "There's nothing real about this. You've been lying to me since the day we met." "I didn't lie," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "I just omitted. There's a difference." "Not to me. There isn't," he said, his voice hardening again. He looked down at Noah, at the trust in his son's eyes, and his resolve solidified. He had to protect him. He had to protect himself. He had built his life on a foundation of honesty and hard work, no matter how meager the results. He wouldn't let it be tainted by the complicated, murky world of secrets and wealth that she represented. He crouched down, his back to Ilara, and spoke softly to his son. "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." He stood up, took Noah's hand, and walked away without another word, without a backward glance. He left Ilara standing alone in the middle of the park she had built, surrounded by the tangible evidence of her generosity, feeling more impoverished than she ever had in her life. The silence in their small apartment that evening was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Liam moved through the motions of making dinner macaroni and cheese from a box, the same meal they had a dozen times a month, but his mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. He had misjudged her. He had let himself be vulnerable, and this was the price. Noah sat at the table, pushing his noodles around his plate, his usual cheerful chatter replaced by a somber quiet. Finally, he looked up at his dad, his brow furrowed. "Is Ilara mad at us?" he asked, his voice small. Liam's heart clenched. "No, buddy, she's not mad." "Then why did you walk away? You looked mad," Liam sighed, sitting down across from him. How could he explain the complex web of pride, class, and trust to a 7-year-old? How could he articulate the feeling of being made to feel small, even by an act of kindness? "It's complicated, Noah, grown-up stuff." "Because she has a lot of money?" Noah asked, his perception startlingly astute. Liam blinked. "How did you know that?" "I heard the man in the suit call her M.S. Vance, and the sign for the swings said they were from the Vance Foundation." "I can read, Dad." Of course, Liam had underestimated his son. He had been so wrapped up in his own feelings that he hadn't considered what Noah might have been observing. "Yeah, buddy," he said, his voice tired. "That's part of it. But it's a good thing, right? She built the new swings." "It is a good thing," Liam agreed. "But sometimes when people have a lot and other people don't, it makes things difficult. It's hard to feel like you're standing on even ground." He didn't know if Noah understood, but the boy nodded slowly, as if processing a difficult new piece of information about the world. Later that night, after Noah was in bed, Liam found himself drawn to the laptop he rarely used. He opened a browser and typed Vance Foundation into the search bar. The results flooded the screen. Articles, press releases, financial reports. It was one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country, with a multi-billion-dollar endowment. And at the top of the About Us page, there she was. A professional headshot of Ella Revance. Her smile was polite, her eyes distant. She looked powerful, untouchable, a world away from the woman who had shared hot chocolate with him on a park bench. The biography was brief and sterile. Heiress to the Vance manufacturing fortune, she had taken over the family foundation 5 years ago, transforming it into a powerhouse of urban renewal and social justice initiatives. She was known for her sharp business acumen and her fiercely private nature, a ghost in the machine of her own making. He clicked through a few articles. The Invisible Philanthropist. The Billionaire Who Builds from the Shadows. It was all there, the truth she had kept from him. He closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. He felt a strange mix of awe and alienation. He hadn't just met a woman in the park. He had stumbled into the orbit of a titan. And he knew, with a sinking feeling of certainty, that he was nothing more than a speck of dust in her vast, glittering universe. Ilara returned to her penthouse apartment, a place that had once felt like a sanctuary but now felt like a cage. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling tapestry of lights that usually soothed her. Tonight, it just looked lonely. She sank onto the white leather couch, the silence of the room pressing in on her. She replayed the scene at the park, over and over, in her mind. The look on Liam's face. The hurt, the accusation, the swift, clean way he had cut her out. He thought she was playing a game. He thought she was some bored, rich woman amusing herself with the lives of the less fortunate. He couldn't have been more wrong. She had never felt more herself than when she was with him and Noah. Their world, with its simplicity and its struggles, was more real to her than anything she had ever known. Her wealth was a barrier, a wall of glass that separated her from genuine human connection. She had tried to be someone else, someone without the weight of a last name, and for a little while, it had worked. She had been just Ilara, and it had been glorious. She walked over to her desk, a sleek slab of imported marble, and picked up a framed photograph. It was the only personal item in the room. It was a picture of her parents, young and smiling, standing in front of a small, modest house. This was before the fortune, before the empire, before they had become strangers to her and to each other. Her father had started Vance Manufacturing in a garage, with a loan from his brother and a dream. He had been a lot like Liam, she realized. Hard-working, proud, a man who built things with his own 2 hands. But the money had changed him. It had corroded him, hollowed him out, leaving behind a man who valued stock prices more than his own daughter. She had spent her life trying not to become him. She had poured her inheritance into the foundation, trying to use the money for good, trying to build something that mattered. But what had it gotten her? A portfolio of successful projects and a life devoid of love. She thought of Liam's hands, calloused and capable. She thought of Noah's easy laughter. She thought of the simple warmth of a shared cup of hot chocolate on a cold day. These were the things that had value. These were the things her money could not buy. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She had found something precious, something real, and, in her fear and her foolishness, she had lost it. She had built a park for a community, but she had failed to build a bridge to the one person in it who had made her feel like she belonged. The days that followed were a quiet, gray agony. Liam stopped going to the park. He told Noah they were taking a break, that they would find other places to explore. They went to the library, to the community pool, to a small patch of woods on the other side of town. But Noah knew. He kept asking about Ilara, his voice small and hopeful. Maybe she'll be at the library, he'd ask. Maybe she likes to swim? Each question was a small, sharp jab to Liam's already bruised heart. He tried to throw himself into finding more work. He picked up a few handyman jobs, fixing a leaky faucet here, patching a hole in a plaster wall there. The money was barely enough to keep them afloat. Every night, he'd sit at the kitchen table, paying bills, the numbers on the page a stark, unforgiving reality. He was a man on a razor's edge, and the fall was a long way down. He found himself thinking about Ilara at odd moments. When he saw a woman in a charcoal coat. When he drank a cup of coffee that was too bitter. When he saw a father and son playing catch. Her absence was a presence, a void that had a shape and a weight. He was angry at her, but he was also angry at himself. He had been too harsh, too quick to judge. He had let his pride build a wall so high that even he couldn't see over it. But what was the alternative? To accept her world? To become the kept man of a benevolent billionaire? The thought made his stomach turn. His dignity was all he had. He wouldn't sell it, not for any price. One evening, a sleek black car pulled up in front of their apartment building. A man in a crisp suit got out and buzzed their apartment. Liam answered the intercom, his voice wary. "Liam Morgan?" The man's voice was smooth, professional. "I'm from the Westwood Community Development Initiative. I'm here to offer you a position." He frowned. "I didn't apply for any position. It's a new role. Park Grounds Supervisor and Community Liaison for Westwood Park, a full-time salaried position with benefits. We saw your work in the park and were very impressed. The job is yours if you want it." Liam's heart hammered in his chest. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, where this was coming from. It was her, trying to fix things the only way she knew how. With money. With a perfectly packaged, strings-attached solution. "I'm not interested," he said, his voice cold. "Sir, the salary is very generous." "I said I'm not interested," he repeated, and he slammed the button, cutting off the connection. He stood there, his hand trembling, a fresh wave of anger and frustration washing over him. She still didn't get it. She thought she could buy him, buy his pride, absorb him into her world on her terms. It wasn't a bridge, it was an acquisition, and he was not for sale. The news of the job offer, and Liam's refusal, reached Ilara through a terse email from her foundation's director. Subject: Westwood Initiative. Morgan declined the position. Please advise on next steps. Ilara stared at the words on the screen, her chest tight with a familiar ache. She had done it again. She had tried to solve a human problem with a financial solution. She had treated him like a variable in an equation, not a man with a heart and a history, and a stubborn, beautiful pride. She had been so focused on what she could give, him stability, security, a life without the constant, grinding worry of poverty, that she hadn't stopped to consider what he would lose, his autonomy. His sense of self. The very thing she admired most about him. She leaned back in her chair, the leather cool against her skin, and closed her eyes. She had to stop this. She had to stop trying to manage the situation, to control the outcome. She had to let it go. But how? How could she walk away from the only real thing she had found in a decade of empty success? Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her assistant. "Mance, Vance, the press is calling. There's a story breaking. Some local blog picked up on the playground installation and your frequent visits to the park. They're calling you the Secret Angel of Westwood. They have photos." Ilara's blood ran cold. "Photos of what?" "Of you. On the bench. Talking to a man and a child." The carefully constructed walls of her private life were beginning to crack. The world she had tried so desperately to keep at bay was closing in. The story spread like wildfire, from a local blog to a city paper, then to the national newswires. Billionaire Philanthropist's Secret Life. Ilara Vance's mystery man. The narrative was irresistible. The reclusive heiress. The struggling single father. the charming inner-city park. It was a modern-day fairy tale, and the media was eating it up. Paparazzi descended on Westwood Park. There, long lenses turning the quiet green space into a fishbowl. They staked out Liam's apartment building, shouting questions at him whenever he came or went. "Are you dating Alara Vance? Has she offered you money? What's your story, buddy?" Heem's life, once small and private, was now a spectacle. He felt exposed, violated. His poverty and his grief laid bare for public consumption. He tried to shield Noah from the worst of it, but the boy was smart. He saw the cameras. He heard the whispers. He stopped asking to go outside. Their small apartment became a fortress, a prison. The worst part was the way the stories portrayed him. He was either a helpless victim, a charity case plucked from obscurity by a benevolent princess, or a cunning opportunist, a gold digger who had cleverly snared a billionaire. Neither was true, but the truth didn't matter. The narrative was set. He was no longer Liam Morgan, a father, a man. He was a character in Alara Vance's story. He felt his identity being erased, overwritten by headlines and speculation. The anger he felt toward Alara curdled into a deep, weary resentment. This was her world. This was the chaos that trailed in her wake. She had been a storm passing through his life, and now he was left to clean up the wreckage. One rainy evening, there was a knock on the door. Liam looked through the peephole and saw her standing in the hallway, her face pale, her hair damp from the rain. He opened the door just a crack, his body blocking the entrance. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. I am so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted this. I tried to kill the story, but it was too late." "It's always too late, isn't it?" he said, his voice flat. "This is what you do. You sweep in, you disrupt, you destroy, and then you offer a check to make it all go away. That's not fair." "Fair?" he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You want to talk about fair? My son is afraid to go to the playground you built because men with cameras are hiding in the bushes. Is that fair?" She flinched as if he had struck her. "I can fix this," she said, her voice desperate. "I'll release a statement. I'll tell them we're just friends, that it was all a misunderstanding." "Don't," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Don't you dare reduce what we had to a misunderstanding. It was real. At least, I thought it was. But I can't live in this circus, Alara. I can't raise my son this way. I need you to leave us alone. For good." He saw the final flicker of hope die in her eyes. She nodded, slowly, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "Okay," she whispered. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. He closed the door, leaned his forehead against the cool wood, and for the first time since his wife had died, he let himself cry. He cried for the loss of his privacy, for the fear in his son's eyes, and for the beautiful, impossible thing he had just thrown away. The media storm eventually passed, as all storms do. A new scandal, a new celebrity romance, captured the public's attention, and the reporters packed up their cameras and moved on. The quiet returned to Westwood Park, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was an empty, quiet, heavy with the ghost of what had been. Liam and Noah started going back to the park, but the joy was gone. Liam moved through his trash-collecting route with a mechanical efficiency, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. Noah no longer ran ahead, his laughter echoing through the trees. He stayed close to his father's side, his small hand often slipping into Liam's as if for reassurance. They never spoke of Alara, but her absence was a constant, unspoken presence. The bench by the old oak tree sat empty, a silent monument to a connection that had been too fragile for the world. Liam's financial situation grew more precarious. Without the handyman jobs, which had dried up during the media frenzy, the city stipend was all he had. He started skipping meals, telling Noah he wasn't hungry, so that his son could have enough. He sold his wife's wedding ring, a small, simple gold band, for a fraction of what it was worth. It felt like selling a piece of his own soul, but he had no choice. He was a man adrift, paddling furiously to keep from sinking, but the shore was nowhere in sight. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed to him, the envelope made of thick, creamy paper, the kind he hadn't seen in years. There was no return address. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The letter was from a prestigious architectural firm, one of the top in the country. It was a job offer, a senior design position, with a salary that made him feel lightheaded. It made no sense. He hadn't sent out a resume in over a year. He hadn't even updated his portfolio. At the bottom of the letter, a handwritten note was scrawled. "We were forwarded your portfolio by a source who has a deep respect for your early work. Your vision is exactly what we're looking for." He knew. He knew it was her. This was different from the park supervisor job. This wasn't charity. This was his life's work, his passion. The part of himself he thought he had lost forever. It was a lifeline, a way out, a chance to rebuild, but it was a lifeline she had thrown him. He sat at his kitchen table, the letter spread out before him, torn. His pride screamed at him to refuse, to throw this gesture of clandestine kindness back in her face. But then he looked at his son, who was carefully drawing a picture at the other end of the table. He looked at the worn-out soles of Noah's shoes, at the hollowness in his own stomach, at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. What was his pride worth? Was it worth more than his son's future? Was it worth more than a chance to be the man he was always meant to be? He thought of Alara, of her quiet strength, of her lonely eyes. She hadn't tried to save him. She had tried to give him the tools to save himself. It was a subtle distinction, but it was everything. He picked up the phone, his heart pounding, and dialed the number on the letterhead. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'd like to accept the position." It wasn't surrender. It was a new beginning, and he had a feeling it was one she had been hoping for all along. Alara received the news in a one-line email from her contact at the architectural firm. He accepted. She read the words, and a slow, quiet relief washed over her. So profound it almost brought her to her knees. She had done something right. She had found a way to help him that honored his dignity, that spoke to his talent, not his need. She had given him a hand up, not a hand out. It had been a risk. She had used her influence, pulled strings she rarely touched, all without his knowledge. If he ever found out, he might resent her for it. But it was a risk she had been willing to take. She had to believe that his happiness, his ability to provide for his son and reclaim his passion was more important than her role in it. She had spent the past few weeks in a self-imposed exile, pouring herself into the work of the foundation. She approved grants, reviewed proposals, and sat in endless, soul-crushing board meetings. She was playing the part of Alara Vance, the powerful, decisive philanthropist, but it was a hollow performance. Her heart was in a small, forgotten park, with a man who picked up trash and a boy who collected lucky rocks. Her board was pressuring her to make a public statement, to do damage control, to put the unfortunate incident behind them. They wanted her to distance herself from Liam, to frame him as a passing acquaintance, a misunderstanding. She had refused. She would not erase him. She would not invalidate the one real connection she had made. One evening, her lead director, a shrewd, silver-haired man named Arthur, came to her office. "Alara," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "the board is concerned. Your personal life is affecting the foundation's image. We need to manage this." "There is nothing to manage, Arthur," she said, her voice cool. "Then you need to create a narrative. You are Alara Vance. You do not have incidents. You have strategies. Was this man a project? A social experiment? Give us an angle we can work with." Alara stood up, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen in years. "He was a person, Arthur, a good decent person. And if this foundation is so concerned with its image that it can't see the value in simple human kindness, then we have failed. I have failed. She walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. I'm restructuring the foundation's mission, she said, her voice quiet but firm. We're going to focus less on large-scale infrastructure and more on direct, human-level support. We're going to find the people who are falling through the cracks, the ones doing the quiet, thankless work, and we're going to empower them. No press releases. No photo ops. Just help. Arthur stared at her, stunned into silence. The reclusive, detached heiress was gone. In her place was a woman with a purpose, a vision, a fire in her belly. She had found her voice. And it had been there all along, waiting for someone to listen, and that someone had been a man in a park. Liam started his new job, and it felt like coming home. The scent of drafting paper, the weight of a T-square in his hand, the collaborative energy of a design studio. It was a world he thought he had left behind forever. He was rusty at first, his skills dulled by disuse, but the passion was still there, a steady flame that quickly reignited. His designs were innovative, thoughtful, infused with a new understanding of how people actually lived in the spaces he created. His work had a new depth, a new humanity. He and Noah moved into a new apartment, a small but clean 2-bedroom in a better neighborhood. It had a small balcony where Liam started a container garden. Noah had his own room for the first time, which he promptly covered in drawings of superheroes and lucky rocks. Life was better. It was stable. It was good. But there was still a hole, a quiet, empty space that had been shaped by Alara's absence. Tuham found himself checking the news, scanning headlines for her name, but she had disappeared from the public eye. It was as if she had vanished into the shadows once more. He told himself it was for the best. They were from two different worlds, and their brief, chaotic intersection had proven that. He had his life back, and she had hers. It was a clean break, but his heart didn't feel clean. It felt incomplete. One Saturday morning, Liam took Noah to Westwood Park. They hadn't been back in months. The park was the same, yet different. The new swings gleamed in the sunlight. The grass was greener, the flower beds more vibrant. It felt cared for, loved. They sat on the bench by the old oak tree, the one where they had first met her. "I miss her, Dad," Noah said, his voice quiet, and put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Me too, buddy." It was the first time he had admitted it out loud, and the confession felt like a release. He didn't have to pretend anymore. He loved her. He loved the quiet, sad, brilliant woman who had seen him when no one else was looking. He didn't know how to find her. He didn't even know if she wanted to be found. But he knew he had to try. He had to build a bridge. He went home and sat down at his drafting table. He didn't sketch a building. He sketched a park, a new design for Westwood Park. A community garden, a small amphitheater for local performances, a sensory playground for children with special needs. It was a vision of what the park could be, a space that didn't just serve the community, but brought it together. He rendered the drawings with painstaking detail, his hands moving with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. He wrote a long letter, pouring out everything he had been too proud and too afraid to say. He told her he understood. He told her he was grateful. He told her he was sorry. He told her he loved her. He bundled the drawings and the letter into a large tube and mailed it to the Vance Foundation headquarters, with no name on the return address. It was a message in a bottle, a leap of faith into a vast, uncertain ocean. He didn't know if it would reach her. But he had to believe that some bridges were worth building, no matter how wide the chasm. The tube arrived at the Vance Foundation, an anonymous, oversized piece of mail in a sea of corporate envelopes. It was flagged by security, scanned, and set aside. It might have sat there for weeks, destined for an intern's slush pile, but a junior assistant, intrigued by the unusual packaging, opened it. She unrolled the drawings, her eyes widening at the beauty and detail of the architectural plans. She read the attached letter, and by the time she was finished, she had tears in her eyes. She knew this was something she couldn't just file away. She walked the tube directly to Elara Vance's office. Elara was in a meeting, a dry, tedious discussion about tax implications and endowment growth. Her assistant interrupted, a rare and serious breach of protocol, and handed her the tube. "Mrs. Vance," she said, "I think you need to see this." Elara unrolled the drawings on the vast, empty surface of her conference table. She saw the park, her park, reimagined, transformed, made better. She saw the careful, elegant handwriting of a man she thought she had lost forever. She read his letter, his words a balm on the raw, open wound of her heart. He understood. He wasn't angry. He was building. For her. For them. The boardroom, with its stale air and soulless chatter, faded away. All she could see were the drawings, a blueprint for a future she hadn't dared to dream of. A future where their two worlds didn't have to collide, but could merge, creating something new, something beautiful, something real. She stood up, her hands resting on the drawings, and looked at the stunned faces of her board members. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I have to go. I have a bridge to cross." She left them there, speechless, and walked out of the boardroom, out of the building, out of the life that had been holding her captive. She didn't know what she would say. She didn't know if it was too late. She only knew that she was done omitting. She was ready to be seen, and she was going to the park. He was there, sitting on the bench by the old oak tree, as if he had been waiting for her. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of light and shadow. He looked up as she approached, and his face was a canvas of hope and fear and a love so profound it took her breath away. She stopped in front of him, the space between them humming with everything unsaid. "You got my drawings," he said, his voice a low rumble. She nodded. "They're beautiful. I didn't know if you'd—" "I'm here," she said, cutting him off. And that was all that mattered. She sat down beside him on the bench. Not too close, but not too far. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of the weight of the past few months. The pain, the misunderstanding, the quiet, stubborn longing. "I was wrong," Hem said, his gaze fixed on the playground where a group of children were laughing on the new swings. "I was so afraid of losing my dignity that I almost lost the best thing that ever happened to me." "I was wrong too," Elara said, her voice soft. "I was so afraid of my own world that I almost forgot how to live in it. I tried to hide from it, and from you. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning." "The truth is," Hem said, turning to look at her, his eyes clear and direct, "I love you, Elara Vance. I love the woman on the bench and the woman who builds parks. I love all of it." She felt the last of her walls crumble, turning to dust in the warm afternoon sun. "I love you too, Hem Morgan," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. It felt like coming home. It felt right. Noah came running over then, his face bright with a smile that was pure, uncomplicated joy. He saw them holding hands, and he didn't look surprised. He looked like he had known this all along. He climbed onto the bench between them, a small, solid bridge connecting their two worlds. And as the three of them sat there, under the branches of the old oak tree, in the middle of the park that had brought them together, they were no longer a philanthropist, an architect, and a little boy. They were a family. And they were finally, beautifully, real. The final scene is not a grand wedding or a dramatic press conference. It's a quiet Saturday morning, a year later. They are in Westwood Park, But it has been transformed. Liam's designs have become a reality. There's a thriving community garden where neighbors work side by side. The small amphitheater hosts a children's story hour. The new sensory playground is filled with the laughter of children of all abilities. Liam is on his hands and knees in the garden, showing Noah how to plant a tomato seedling. His face is smudged with dirt, and he is smiling, a deep, contented smile. He is wearing the clean, sturdy work clothes of a project manager, a man who builds things with his hands and his heart. Ilara is sitting on the edge of the garden bed, a small, leather-bound notebook in her lap, but she isn't making notes. She is sketching. A quick, simple drawing of Liam and Noah, their heads bent together over the small green plant. Her hair is tied back in a messy bun, and she is wearing a faded pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt. She looks relaxed, happy, at peace. A community member, an older woman with a kind face, walks by and waves. "Morning, Ilara. The garden's looking beautiful this year." "Thanks, Mrs. Gomez," Ilara calls back, her smile easy and natural. Liam's the one with the green thumb. Lime looks up and winks at her. Noah holds up a worm he's found, his face a mixture of disgust and delight. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the three of them, a small family unit in the heart of the thriving, vibrant community they have built together. It wasn't about one world saving the other. It was about two worlds coming together to create a third, one built on a foundation of trust, respect, and the quiet, revolutionary power of seeing another person for who they truly are. And in that park, under the warm morning sun, they had everything.